Imagine you are standing on the deck of a wooden warship in the middle of the Atlantic. It is noon. The sun is a white hammer overhead, and the tar between the planks has gone soft and sticky under your bare feet. Your hands are raw from hauling rope. Your back aches. Your mouth tastes of salt and old biscuit and the faint rot of the water in the casks below. You have been at sea for 11 weeks, and then you hear it. A shrill call from the bosun's pipe, and two words passed hand to hand down the length of the deck. Up spirits. Every man stops what he is doing. The lines form without an order being given because no order is needed. At the center of the deck sits a great wooden tub, oak-bound with brass hoops, and beside it stands the purser with his measure. One by one the men step forward. One by one they receive their share. A half-pint of rum, strong enough to make your eyes water, poured into whatever cup or horn or hollowed thing each man owns. For most of the souls aboard this ship, this single moment is the best part of the entire day. It is the reward. It is the comfort. It is the one small mercy in a life made almost entirely of work and weather and fear. And here is the question that should stop you cold. Why did the most powerful navy the world had ever seen, and every pirate crew that ever sailed against it, pour an ocean of liquor down the throats of their own men, every single day, for nearly 300 years? Why would any commander hand a daily dose of strong spirits to the very men he needed sober enough to fire a cannon, climb a mast, and obey an order in the middle of a storm? And what did all that rum actually do to the men who drank it? The answer is stranger and darker than you might expect, because rum did not simply make sailors drunk. Rum kept them alive, and at the very same time, slowly, quietly, over months and years at sea, rum turned some of them into something monstrous. Both of these things are true. They were always true at once. The same ration that a sailor would mutiny to protect was both his medicine and his slow poison. It was the thing that made the impossible voyages of the age of sail survivable, and it was the thing that hollowed men out from the inside until they barely recognized the people they had been when they first stepped aboard. To understand how a single drink could do both, you have to understand the world these men lived in, and the problem that rum was invented to solve. That problem was water. It sounds almost too simple to be true, but the hardest thing about crossing an ocean in a wooden ship was not the enemy, and it was not the storms. It was finding something safe to drink. Fresh water taken aboard in wooden casks did not stay fresh. Within a couple of weeks it began to turn. Algae bloomed in it. It grew a skin. It started to stink, and then it started to crawl, and a sailor who drank from the bottom of an old cask was as likely to get violently sick as he was to quench his thirst. Beer lasted longer, and for centuries beer was the standard ration in northern fleets, a full gallon a day for every man. But beer spoiled too, and it spoiled faster the warmer the water got. The moment a fleet sailed south into the heat of the Caribbean or the coast of Africa, the beer went sour in the barrels, and the men were left with a choice between rotten water and nothing at all. Then someone discovered something that changed everything. Distilled spirits did not spoil. You could pour rum or brandy or arrack into a cask, seal it, and sail it around the entire world, and a year later it would be exactly as drinkable as the day you loaded it. It did not grow a skin. It did not crawl. It did not turn. In a wooden world where almost everything rotted, here at last was a liquid that simply would not die. And because of that single property, alcohol aboard ship stopped being a luxury and became a necessity. It was not handed out to make men merry. It was handed out because it was, very often, the only safe thing left to drink. This is the part of the story that gets forgotten. The daily ration did not begin as a vice. It began as survival. And the spirit that came to define that survival more than any other was rum. To understand why, you have to go to Jamaica in the year 1655. An English fleet, sent across the Atlantic on the orders of Oliver Cromwell, seized the island from Spain. It was not even the prize they had been sent to capture. They had failed at their first target and grabbed Jamaica almost as a consolation. But Jamaica came with something the English Navy did not yet know it desperately wanted: sugar. And where there is sugar, there is molasses, the dark, sticky byproduct of refining it. And where there is molasses, you can make rum cheaply, endlessly, and right there in the warm waters where English ships now needed to drink. Up to that point, the spirit ration in English ships had usually been brandy bought at expense from France and Spain, the very nations England spent most of the century at war with. Rum changed the arithmetic completely. It was local, it was cheap, it was strong, and it lasted forever in the cask. So the Navy made a quiet, practical decision that would echo for the next 3 centuries. It began issuing rum. The ration settled into a daily half-pint of the stuff for every grown man aboard, and what had started as a sensible cost-saving measure hardened, year by year, into something far more powerful than a mere supply choice. It became a rite. It became a ritual. It became the one thing a sailor could count on. And here is the pattern that repeats all through this story, the same pattern you find behind so many institutions that outlive their own logic. A practical fix becomes a habit, the habit becomes a tradition, and the tradition becomes something no one in power dares to take away, long after anyone can remember why it began. So picture the system as it actually worked, day after day, year after year across thousands of ships. Twice a day in many vessels the call would go up spirits. The bosun's pipe would shrill and the men would gather and the great rum tub would be brought up from below. On Royal Navy ships that tub often had words carved or painted across its front, a loyal toast to the king, brass letters gleaming against the dark oak. The purser, watched closely by suspicious eyes, would measure out each man's share. A lanceman, a boy, or a man being punished might get less or none. But every able seaman got his full measure, and woe betide the purser caught shorting a man even a thimbleful. The rum was the one account on the whole ship that the lowest sailor watched as carefully as any admiral watched a battle. And then there was what the rum did to the body that drank it. A half-pint of Navy rum was not a gentle thing. This was overproof spirit, strong enough that, by the Navy's own old test, you could soak gunpowder in it and the powder would still catch fire. Issued neat, undiluted to men who had eaten little but salt meat and weevil-ridden biscuit, on bodies worn down by labor and short on sleep, the effect was exactly what you would imagine. Men got drunk. Not pleasantly, not occasionally, but routinely, dangerously in the middle of a working warship. A drunk man does not climb wet rigging 80 feet above a heaving deck without sometimes falling, and men did fall, and men died. A drunk man does not take an insult quietly, and the lower decks ran thick with brawls and grudges and knives drawn over nothing. The punishment books of the age are full of the consequences. Flogging after flogging, the lash laid on backs for drunkenness, for fighting, for striking an officer, for sleeping on watch, and behind so many of those entries sat the same wooden tub and the same daily measure that the Navy itself was pouring out. The system that fed the men was also steadily wrecking them, and everyone aboard knew it, and for the better part of a century nobody changed it. Because how do you take away the one thing your men live for without losing the men themselves? That impossible question finally met a man stubborn enough to answer it. His name was Edward Vernon, and in the year 1740 he was a vice admiral commanding a British fleet in the Caribbean. Vernon was a hard, blunt, deeply unpopular officer, the kind of man who said exactly what he thought and made enemies doing it. And what he thought, watching his fleet, was that the neat rum ration was destroying his ability to fight. His ships were riddled with drunkenness. His men were sick, insubordinate, accident-prone, and useless for hours after every issue of spirits. He could not simply abolish the ration. No commander could, and survive it. The men would have risen against him. But he could change how it was served. So on the 21st of August, 1740, Vernon issued an order to the captains under his command. From now on, the rum would not be served neat. It would be mixed with water, a full quart of water to every half-pint of rum, and it would be issued in 2 separate servings across the day rather than one great dose. Later, he allowed sugar and lime or lemon juice to be added to make the watered spirit palatable. The men hated it at first, of course. They called the diluted ration after the admiral himself. Vernon was known across the fleet by a nickname earned from the coat he always wore, a coat made of a coarse weatherproof cloth called grogram. They called him Old Grog. And so the watered rum took his name, and from that day forward, sailors called it grog. Here is the twist worth sitting with, though. Vernon did not do this out of kindness. He was not trying to be gentle with his men or to protect their health out of any tender feeling. He was a fighting admiral trying to win battles, and he had simply worked out that a half-drunk crew loses to a sober one. His order was cold, practical fleet management. And yet that cold order spread across the entire Royal Navy, became standard practice, and outlived Vernon, outlived his enemies, outlived the wooden ships he sailed and the empire he served. One irritable admiral's attempt to keep his men on their feet long enough to fire a broadside gave the world a word that is still spoken today, and changed the daily life of millions of sailors he would never meet. That is what it took to bend the ration even slightly towards sense. Not compassion, just a commander who needed his men to survive the afternoon. But the Royal Navy was only one part of this story, and arguably the more disciplined part. Out on the edges of the law, beyond the reach of any admiral or any order, sailed men who drank without any Vernon to water their cup. The pirates. To the pirate crews of the Golden Age, rum was not a measured ration but a way of life, and they drank in a way that would have horrified even the hardest Navy purser. There was no half-pint limit on a pirate ship. There was no purser guarding the tub, no flogging for drunkenness, no admiral demanding sobriety before battle. When a pirate crew took a prize, the very first thing they often plundered was the liquor, and the very first thing they did with it was drink it, all of it as fast as they could. Pirate articles, the rough constitutions these crews wrote for themselves, sometimes tried to ban drinking below decks at night for fear of fire, or to keep the men fit to fight. They were almost never obeyed. And here the double edge of the drink showed itself at its sharpest. The same rum that fueled the legendary, reckless ferocity of pirate boarding parties, the wild courage that made undermanned pirate sloops willing to throw themselves at larger ships, was the same rum that rotted those crews from within. Drunken pirates were dangerous to their enemies, and just as dangerous to each other. Quarrels over a card game or a share of plunder turned to bloodshed in an instant when half the crew was deep in drink. Famous pirate captains were caught and killed because their men were too drunk to fight when the Navy finally arrived. The very freedom that pirates prized, the freedom from any Vernon telling them when to stop, was the freedom that helped destroy them. A Navy crew was wrecked slowly by the steady daily ration. A pirate crew often wrecked itself all at once, in a single night of plunder and drink. Yet rum was not the only thing in that wooden cup that was quietly deciding who lived and who died. There was a second killer stalking every long voyage, one that the men did not understand at all, and it was here that human ingenuity, fumbling in the dark, stumbled onto one of the great accidental rescues in history. The killer was scurvy. On any voyage that ran long enough, sailors began to sicken in a horrible and mysterious way. Their gums swelled and blackened and bled. Their teeth loosened and fell out. Old wounds, healed for years, split open again as if the body had forgotten how to hold itself together. Their limbs ached and bruised at a touch, and then they grew too weak to stand, and then they died. Whole crews could be cut down by it. More men lost to scurvy on a single long voyage than to any enemy. Nobody knew the cause. We know now it was the simple absence of vitamin C, which the body cannot make or store for long, and which the salt meat-and biscuit diet of a ship contained almost none of. But to the men of the age it was a curse, a mystery, a thing that came out of the empty ocean to eat them alive. The cure was found the way most things were found in that brutal era, by trial, by error, and by a few stubborn men paying attention. A naval surgeon named James Lind ran one of the first true medical experiments in history, taking sailors already sick with scurvy and trying different remedies on them, and finding that the ones given oranges and lemons recovered while the others did not. It took the Navy decades, far too long, to truly act on what men like Lind had shown. But eventually citrus juice, Lemon at first and later lime became part of the daily issue, mixed right into the grog alongside the rum and the water and the sugar. And so the very same ritual that was slowly poisoning the men became, almost by accident, the thing that saved them from a far worse death. The daily cup that contained the slow harm of alcohol now also carried the cure for the curse that had emptied ships for centuries. British sailors, mocked for their lime-laced ration, picked up a nickname that stuck for good: limeys. They wore the insult, but they survived the voyages that killed everyone else, and the squeeze of a lime into a cup of grog quietly saved more lives across the age of sail than any cannon ever took. So step back and ask the deeper question. Why did this ration endure for so long, through all its obvious harm? Why, when commanders could see men falling from the rigging and brawling on the gun deck, did the rum keep flowing for nearly 3 centuries? The answer has 3 parts, and all 3 explain the strange grip the cup held over these men. The first is psychology. Life at sea in the age of sail was a thing of almost unimaginable hardship: endless labor, terrible food, brutal punishment, deadly weather, and crushing boredom stretched across months out of sight of land. The daily ration was the one bright point in all of it. It was reward and it was relief, and it was the closest thing to comfort that the Navy offered. Take a man's pay and he grumbles. Take a man's one daily comfort, the single moment he looks forward to from the time he wakes, and you take something far harder to replace. Second part is dependency, and it cut deeper than mere habit. A fleet of men who received strong spirits every day for years became, in body and in mind, reliant on them. Crews would tolerate bad food and worse pay, but a captain who tried to cut or cancel the rum ration was courting open mutiny. There are records across the age of sailors near rebellion over the loss of their grog, men who would face the lash over their wages but who would not, under any circumstance, surrender their cup. The ration had become so woven into the rhythm of life at sea that removing it felt less like a policy change and more like an attack on the men themselves. The Navy had created a need, fed it daily, and then found it could not easily unfeed it. And the third part is the darkest, and it is the heart of why the title of this story speaks of monsters. Rum did not only keep men alive and keep them content, it also lubricated cruelty. A great deal of what happened aboard those ships and on the shores they raided was savage almost beyond description, and drink made the savagery easier. It made the floggings easier to watch and the violence easier to commit. Men did things, in drink and after drink, that the sober versions of themselves might never have done, and then they did them again, and the doing got easier each time. The ration that softened the misery of the men also softened their consciences. The thing that helped them endure the cruelty of their world also helped them inflict it. And over a long enough voyage, over a long enough career at sea, you can watch in the records how ordinary men, fed daily on hardship and hardened daily on rum, became people their own families would not have recognized. That is the monster the title means. Not a sea creature, not a curse from the deep, just a person, slowly remade one cup at a time. So why did the great ration finally end? In part, because the world that made it necessary simply went away. Steam replaced sail, and steamships could carry condensers that turned seawater into fresh drinking water, so the old problem of rotting casks faded into history. Refrigeration and canning meant food and water could be kept safe in ways the old wooden world never dreamed of. Ideas about discipline changed, and navies that increasingly ran on machinery, on engines and boilers and complex guns, could no longer afford crews dulled by daily spirits. The ration shrank and shrank again, and the reasons for it fell away one by one until almost nothing was left but the tradition itself. And yet even then, even when every practical reason was gone, the tradition clung on because of all those things we have already named: the comfort, the dependency, the sheer weight of 300 years of ritual. It held on, in fact, all the way until the year 1970. On the 31st of July of that year, the Royal Navy issued its daily rum ration for the very last time. Sailors across the fleet, in ships scattered around the world, gathered one final time at the call of up spirits. Some wore black armbands. Some held mock funerals for the ration, carrying a coffin or a cask in solemn procession across the deck. There were tears among hard men who would have been embarrassed to be seen shedding them over anything else. They called it Black Tot Day, and when the last measure had been poured and the last cup drained, more than 3 centuries of unbroken tradition came quietly to an end. The tub was put away. The pipe fell silent. The call of up spirits, which had echoed across the wooden decks of the age of sail and the steel decks of the age of iron, was never to be heard as a daily summons again. And when you think about all of it, the centuries of it, try not to think first of the admirals and the orders and the institution. Think of the men. Think of the ordinary sailor we began with, standing in the noon line with his cup, his hands raw and his back aching, and 11 weeks of ocean behind him. For him, that half-pint was not policy or tradition or a line in a ledger. It was the one kindness in a life that offered almost none. It was warmth in the cold, courage before battle, sleep after horror, and a few minutes each day when the misery loosened its grip. We do not know most of their names. The records rarely bothered with the men of the lower deck except to note their punishments and their deaths. But they were the ones who crossed the oceans, who fought the battles, who built the empires and the legends on the strength of that daily cup. And the cup gave them both things at once, right to the end. It carried them across the world, and it carried some of them under. It kept them alive through voyages that should have killed them, and it slowly killed a part of them that no voyage ever could. That is the truth at the bottom of the tub, the thing that makes rum more than just a drink in this story. The things that keep us going can also be the things that consume us. The comfort that gets a person through an unbearable life can, given long enough, become the thing that takes the life over. Every sailor who ever stepped forward at the call of up spirits was taking a small drink of survival and a small drink of ruin in the very same measure, and most of them never knew which one they were swallowing until it was far too late to choose. So the next time you see a painting of a tall ship under full sail, its decks crowded with men, its flag snapping in a fair wind, remember what was waiting below those decks. A great oak tub bound in brass, and a daily measure of something that kept the impossible voyage possible, and slowly, quietly, asked a terrible price for it. Remember that the men who sailed those ships were carried across the entire world on the strength of a single cup, and that the same cup followed some of them all the way down into the dark. That was the bargain of the age of sail. That was the drink that kept the crews alive. And that was the drink that, one measure at a time, turned some of them into monsters.